This is a variation of one of the most iconic fly patterns of all time, the woolly bugger. No matter the season, this pattern catches fish. This is Midnight Magic. We're going to start by sliding our brass bead onto the hook, and then we're going to lock it into the vise. There are many bead and hook options, but today I'll be using a size 12 hook and a size 3mm bead. Now it's time to grab our thread. Today I'm going to be using black 140 denier. I'm going to start by making a few wraps near the bead, making sure to wrap over the tag end to lock it into place. Once properly secured, I'll start to wrap down the shank of the hook. I'll hold the tag end tight and snip it off. Once the thread is locked into place, I'll begin making even wraps towards the back bend of the hook. Once I get to where the hook begins to bend, I will grab my marabou. I'm going to take a small chunk of my marabou and use this as a tail. Now, there are many opinions on how long or short your tail should be, but typically a good place to start is by making it the same size of the shank of the hook you're tying on. I'll begin with a couple of loose wraps over the top, and at this point I can make any adjustments as needed. Looks good to me, so I will continue to wrap towards the bead of the hook to properly secure all of the marabou feathers into place. Once the tail is properly locked into place, I will then snip off the excess. At this point, I'll begin to put some firm wraps up near the bead, and then begin to wrap back towards the tail to lock more materials into place. Now it's time to grab our chenille. This is a black chenille that I'll be using to make a tapered body out of. Just like the marabou, I'll be making a few solid wraps to lock it into place. Once I'm wrapped into place, I will begin to wrap my thread towards the bead in order to get ready to wrap my chenille. This part doesn't have to be perfect because everything you're doing is going to be covered up by the chenille. I will then begin to start to wrap my chenille towards the bead, making sure to wrap evenly as I'm going towards the front of the hook. The chenille should give a segmented and tapered look as you wrap it forward. Once you get your chenille wrapped to the bead, you'll take your thread and wrap over the chenille to lock it into place. At this point, you'll grab your scissors and snip off the excess. Now, this part is completely optional, but I like to use a dubbing brush to brush out the chenille. Or in my case, I guess you could say sticky Velcro on a mechanical pencil. Once that chenille is brushed out to your liking, it's time to grab your hackle. This is a woolly bugger hackle in the color black. I'm going to begin by brushing the fibers of the hackle back, just leaving the tip as a place for me to lock into place. We will lock the hackle feathers into place just like we did all the other materials with a few solid wraps. Once fully secured into place, we'll snip off the tag end and then begin to make our collar out of the hackle. I like to get the hackle feathers a little bit wet and pull them back away from the head of the fly. Pulling the hackle feathers back like this makes it easier to wrap the collar. At this point, it's time to start to wrap the collar. As I start to wrap the collar, I want to make sure that I'm brushing those fibers back with each wrap. Continuing to brush those fibers back, make sure that the fibers lay even and consistent as you wrap towards the bead. Once you get your collar wrapped to your liking, you can begin to take your thread and wrap over the remaining tag of your hackle. Use a few solid wraps to make sure that that hackle collar gets fully locked into place, and then you can snip off the excess. Once the excess has been snipped off, you can begin to clean up the head of the hook by trimming up any of those unwanted hackle feathers that are extruding past the bead. Once the hackle feathers are all cleaned up, you can begin to put a few solid wraps right next to the back of the bead to fully lock the entire pattern into place. Now it's time for my favorite part, grabbing the whip finisher and finishing this fly off. I like to spin the whip finisher around 3 or 4 times, and then I tightly pull my thread to lock that knot into place. At this point, you can go ahead and cut your thread off and your fly is complete. This fly has been an absolute killer pattern for me, and I hope it catches as many fish for you as it has for me. If you like this video and want to see more just like it, please consider subscribing. Thanks, you guys.